moved on. The reason this graphic shows NASA looming over the White House is because NASA had extraordinary power in Washington then, and it does now. I now understand where that power comes from, but at that time we were so naive, we just felt that, well, NASA actually worked for the president, so the president, if he wanted to overrule NASA and call it something more intriguing than the Constitution, he would certainly be able to do so. So we began the campaign, appealing to Gerald Ford, who was fighting his own campaign that summer, the summer of '76, to not let Ronald Reagan take the presidency away from him because he, remember, had been appointed to replace Nixon, and this was going to be his first campaign for his own shot at the White House in the fall of 1976, the bicentennial summer and fall. So that entire summer, as I went west to cover the first Viking landing on the moon, on Mars rather, which the reason I get the two confused is because it turned out that it was the same date that we landed an unmanned Viking spacecraft on Mars that we had landed on the moon, July 20th. Didn't have a clue then why NASA somehow got that coincidence going. Of course, we do now. In the meantime, my friend Jerry Glenn had asked us to prepare a white paper. You can't do policy in Washington without preparing a white paper. So we prepared a white paper for the President of the United States, researching and putting on paper all of the ships of the line, the enterprises going back through American history, all the way back to UK history, where almost by chance, but maybe not really, the first of all the new vessels which had taken to the seas from before the Revolutionary War wound up being called Enterprise. And there was the Brigantine Enterprise in the Revolutionary War. Moving forward, there was the U.S. Aircraft Enterprise, which was the fighting lady who almost, without her, we may not have won World War II. There was then, in a much more modern era, in the 50s and 60s, the first nuclear aircraft carrier, the Enterprise, which is depicted here. This, by the way, is the work of a guy named John Eves, who was an art director, a designer, a brilliant artist who did all these sketches for the Enterprise TV show, and I'll give him proper credit. And then on July 20th, on that amazing dawn of 1976, as Roddenberry and I are sitting in the front row in the Von Karman Auditorium, and I'm wearing that terrible haircut and that awful suit, because we all wore those stupid things back then. Oh, that history could quietly erase that from memory. In Washington, slowly through the labyrinth of policy and the White House mailroom and NASA machinations behind the scene, and NASA people actually going out to Star Trek conventions saying, "You can't do this, it's un-American, you have no right to take this." I mean, they actually argued on the record that American citizens did not have the right to appeal to their government to overrule NASA and to name this ship Enterprise. People paid by NASA. In fact, I can give you the name of the guy who was leading the charge. His name was Jesko von Puttkamer, a Nazi, a real Nazi. Now I understand why Jesko not only hated the idea, but got me in his little beady sights and took a real bead on me and ultimately convinced Roddenberry that I should not be named science advisor to the first Star Trek film. Because if they did that, NASA would withdraw all support and Gene wouldn't get a dime or any use of hardware or facilities in the making of the movie that he had wanted to make for a generation, the first major Star Trek film. That's how vindictive NASA was then, and still can be politically if you cross their path the wrong way. So, in September, as Eric Burgess and I are making our way back and forth from the Valley, where I was staying with him that incredible Viking summer, covering the first unmanned landing on Mars, the most extraordinary unmanned mission of our lifetime, where we came within a whisker of proving that life exists on Mars even now. And in hindsight, of course, we now know that all the conversations that I watched take place and all the bizarre things that made no sense make perfect sense. because NASA was in the process of actively covering up that Viking had discovered life on Mars by changing the rules in mid-flight. Each of those experiments on that Viking mission turned up positive results for life, and NASA resolutely and forthrightly decried and eschewed and denied any of those results and said it was all just, ready? Funny chemistry. Yeah, really funny chemistry. In the meantime, tracked by my friend Jerry Glenn, on a September afternoon, I think it was first week in September, something like that, at the crack of dawn at Eric's house, I get a phone call. And Eric comes knocking on the door. Richard, Dick, you got a phone call from Washington. So I stumble over to the phone, because in those days, even extensions in various rooms was something that wasn't normal. I go down to the kitchen, pick up the phone. Yeah. Jerry said, he did it. I said, what? He said, he did it. He named the damn thing Enterprise. And this is how it looked. This is the only photograph in the entire NASA archive of the Space Shuttle being officially handled by the President of the United States, Jerry Ford, being shown and demonstrated by Dr. Fletcher. And it is a lousy picture. I tried my best to clean it up. It's the one little shot, maybe 20 pixels across in the NASA archive online, because NASA hated the idea that it was going to be Enterprise. Because, as Jared B. from one of the fanzines called Trekdom says, faced with a deluge of trekkers, President Gerald Ford casually remarked to NASA Chief Fletcher in late afternoon, I'm a little partial to the name Enterprise. Ford did not mention the letters or petitions. Instead, he claimed that he liked the name because he'd served aboard a Navy ship that serviced an aircraft carrier by that name. Talk about political gymnastics. Fletcher objected, which of course we knew he would, and Jerry Ford, to his everlasting credit, overruled him. I have a feeling that there was more going on behind the scenes than just the letters. Because, as you're going to hear later on in the evening, Jerry Ford was a Mason. Gene Roddenberry was a Mason. Masons are crucial in our unfolding tale, as you are going to see. Masons, in fact, the real ones, not the fake ones, are the good guys. And obviously, Jerry Ford and Gene Roddenberry shared an ideal, which was how to use this to democratize humankind's faint toehold in space. And Ford didn't have a moon program, but he did have control of something called a shuttle. And so he overruled Fletcher, and thereby the first space shuttle in history was called Enterprise. Now we flash forward the film. Remember how Ford didn't want to even identify with Star Trek or say that it was anything to do with the letters or the fans? Well, we now have a president, name is Barack Obama, and he can really do the Spock, Vulcan salute like no president I've ever seen. In fact, there's a lot of, remember that film called The Music Man, where, forget the name of the actor, Robert Preston. He talked about, you got to be careful because you'll see certain words and lingo creeping into your kids' vocabulary, like whiz-bang and what. Well, Obama drops Star Trek references all the time, and no one gets it. No one understands, and I hope you will by the end of the evening, that in fact, this is not an accident. This is part of a much longer game plan. And there have been bumps in the road and all kinds of other stuff that's gone on over the last 3 years. But by and large, that game plan now appears to be on track to some amazing, astonishing things. And yes, Steve, we're on the edge of forever. So in 1976, on that sunny September afternoon, I think it was September 17th, Gene, here in one of these stupid leisure suits, and most of the crew, except for Bill Shatner, who never showed up for any of these things, stood there. There's, DeForest Kelley talking with Dr. Fletcher, who, of course, is gritting his teeth because He didn't want this thing named Enterprise. And there's a lot of people, I mean, look how young Walter Koenig looks. He's the only guy that looks like he's really enjoying himself. Everybody else looks, there's Nichelle, all right? This huge, amazing spaceship that was going to take us all where no one had gone before was in fact named Enterprise. And the band played, and she rolled out of the hangar, and people stood up and they cheered. And here's, Leonard and George and DeForest and Scotty Doohan. Household names from a different century, a vision of a future that everybody could identify with, where it didn't matter whether you were black or white or a woman or Asian or a commie. You could get along and you could make amazing things happen and boldly go together for the benefit of all humankind. The Federation, a confederation of different cultures and backgrounds and races who in fact shared one dream, which was to find out what's out there and then to use it for the benefit of everyone. That was Gene's vision. That was what we hoped we could instill in this ship as a template for things to come. How naive we were. How incredibly naive. But it did have a very interesting legacy in ways that I could not have foreseen. One guy who really got impressed with what we pulled off was this guy. Because all the rest of his career with Star Trek, up until he tragically and prematurely died of a stroke in 1991, Enterprise and the idea there was a synthesis of reality and fiction, that it was basically life imitating art and art imitating life, almost in like an Ouroboros with a snake eating its tail, where you can't tell where one begins and the other ends. And we can define the future by our dreams. That became so much a part of his own mythology. Here's a shot from the Star Trek film, which I did not wind up being a science advisor on because of politics at NASA. This is one of the chief characters. She ultimately winds up melding with V'ger and going, in very exotic places together with her lover and the second officer of the Enterprise. But there's a scene where he's showing her, as an alien coming aboard the ship for the first time, the sequence of historical references to the enterprises that have existed before. And right there, after the brigantine and the aircraft carrier that Gerald Ford didn't serve on, but he served on a ship that was next to her, there is the Enterprise, right there on the recreation deck of the mythical starship, carrying everyone's hopes and dreams into a future that Gene felt we could have if enough of us simply demanded, like we demanded that she get this name. It was supposed to be a symbolic victory for ordinary folks, and it became a victory at levels that you cannot imagine, because, of course, the Enterprise mission itself is named after this very important moment in history. This now is another set of photos, again from John Eves. Those sketches I showed you before were the sketches that graced the walls of Archer's Ready Room in the umpteenth series extension of the franchise on television. Again, Gene was so impressed that somehow a bunch of Trekkies had gotten together. And as John Everhart, my friend of Science News, said, the only difference between Trekkies, and he kept using the word Trekkie, not Trekker, the Trekkies and space people otherwise, citizens, taxpayers, is that the Trekkies figured out that if they demanded something from their government, they might actually get it. And yes, they and we did. Well, of course, Gene carried this into the films. This is the Brigantine Enterprise. And a very funny scene that plays out in the film where Worf is supposed to jump off the plank and get his hat, his officer's hat. And no one has ever made this jump before, and he lands successfully. And I think Data is the one that says, remove the plank, as opposed to retract the plank. And so the holographic computer simply makes the plank disappear, and Worf falls in the water. Gene had stunning fun with this metaphor over and over again. Enterprise, here and now and then. and I'm sure you're going to see it come back again and again because it's timeless. It actually now forevermore, because of all of us, those of us that have this dream, it is anchored in a reality that can, I firmly believe, if we take that spirit and move it in the direction you're going to see later in the evening, can affect the future positively once again, because stunning new tools are presenting themselves for political action and political perspicacity. The shuttle was instrumental in building several huge technological feats in space, like the space station. It lofted the Hubble Space Telescope into orbit. It serviced the Mir as a prelude to the space station. It had 135 missions. It extended 30 years. Many of the spacecraft have fabled, iconic, incredibly symbolic names, such as Atlantis, such as Enterprise, such as Endeavour, or Discovery. And this, of course, are a few shots from the last mission. This is it approaching the space station, which is this is a device in orbit that humans have built, like the von Braun vision, where we'd take up chunks and chunks and chunks, and you'd assemble them with men and women outside in spacesuits with spanners and bolts and drills that were converted into bolt, fasteners, all kinds of tools. The art form of manufacturing, assembling human things in space, had never been done and would never have been possible if it hadn't been for the shuttle. So if we are poised on the edge, as I hope to show you, of going boldly a lot farther now than we have gone before, without the 30 years of doing this, without the 30 years of building these things in orbit, we wouldn't have things like this. We wouldn't have the expertise, the knowledge base. We wouldn't be able to assemble the expeditions that will carry, again, with conventional technology. No Star Trek drives, no hyperdimensional physics need apply yet. If we simply put to use what we already know how to do, that we have done over the last couple of generations, then the future, the revolution which is going to come, will arrive full-born, because what's out there, if we can get there, is going to be, if it not already tonight is, as you're going to see, the game changer which changes all of future history. And without that 30 years of the shuttle, which I have myself denigrated publicly, calling it basically a truck that went around and around and around and around, it kept us politically and technologically and financially trapped in low Earth orbit, as it was designed to do 30-some years ago, I now fully understand. But the one positive thing it did, it gave us the time to develop the expertise to, when the politics all magically arrived at the same moment, we could then take flight and use that expertise to go places that are almost unimaginable by ordinary men and women watching television or watching CNN or the BBC. And we're poised, as I will show you later on tonight, on that threshold. And that threshold is literally only weeks or at most months away, if the dots that I'm going to connect, in fact, continue, as they certainly appear to be doing. So with the end of the shuttle, we are left with this symbolic question. This is another one of the stunning shots from the last 30 years. The shuttle silhouetted against, as Ben Franklin was asked one day at the Continental Congress, is it sunrise or is it sunset? Is it the beginning of something or is it the end of something? What we do from here, all of us who are here tonight and all of us who watch this on television, what we collectively do, like all those 400,000 people in the pre-internet era who wrote, according to the Washington Post, to NASA and the White House and demanded something of their government, and for God's sake, they got it. If we do the same, given the tools that are now available to us, what cannot be done? And the Enterprise herself, well, she's going to New York. She's going to become part of the Intrepid Air and Space Museum in the harbor of New York. It'd been better if she went to San Francisco, a little more, that's where the Enterprise in Gene's mythology was built. But I'll settle for New York. A lot more people are going to see her there and hopefully get in the spirit of what we were able to accomplish in the real world by holding out a dream.